Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and welcome to my view on the week ahead, what's going on up there in the stars. Now, I have spent quite a lot of time recently talking about Pluto, and this is because this planet is just relentlessly on our astrological map. But I'm going to make it a little different this week, and I'll come on to that shortly. What I want to say is that at this point of time, we're living in very, very interesting times, as I'm sure you can see. And as I looked at the week ahead last week, and I talked about the things that would be happening this week that's just passed, it didn't disappoint in the sense that we suddenly had the President of the United States deciding that US troops should come out of northeastern Syria. And of course, that allowed the Turks to come in an attempt to reclaim the land that they feel belongs to them. But of course, the repercussions of that action, especially an action taken on Pluto's watch, is going to be huge. And I have talked quite a lot about that on my homepage on astrology.com if you're interested in looking at that. And I will come back and take another little look at last week because the other rather good thing, not every bad thing in the world happens on Pluto's watch. And in fact, towards the end of the week, we had some very encouraging signs in the Brexit saga, in that Leo Varadkar, who is the leader of Ireland's Fine Gael party, he and Boris Johnson had some good discussions, and it's based on those things that they agreed upon or thought were a way forward, that discussions this weekend will take place with European leaders as well, and we'll see where we go from there. But those keywords of Pluto, elimination, let's get rid of the old way it used to be and let's transform it, let's get a whole new plan going. And that's very much something that we're observing. But what I wanted to do was take a step out and have a little look at Libra, because we are living in the time of Libra. And although this might mean everything to those of you who were born under the sign of Libra, we've all got Libra somewhere in our horoscope. And so this is a time that we get in touch with various aspects of Libra, the sun sign. Now, it's an interesting sign, Libra. It's an air sign, and with air signs, we're always in the realm of ideas and discussions, and it's kind of cerebral, it's subjective, all those good air qualities. But it's ruled by Venus, which is why we come right into the area of love and romance, mediation, looking at two sides of issues. There's lots of lawyers and things that have that kind of justice behind them, that have a Libra rulership. And to a certain extent, all Librans are good arguers. If you ever met a Libran who can't argue well, they all can at some level. One of the other things that people forget about Libra, because they think of it as this Venus-ruled air sign, they forget that it's a cardinal sign. It's a modality, as we say, is cardinal, and that means it's self-motivated. And Librans, even though they are fence sitters, and we have to remember that they only sit on the fence, not because they don't know what they want to do or what they think is the right way forward. It's because they don't want to offend anyone, or they don't want to look bad. They want everything to be reasonable and accessible and all those good, nice air sign words. And that's why they sit on the fence. But basically, they're movers and shakers. And I wanted to give you a little list of people who kind of typify Libra in that way. I want to look at, yes, some of the signs of great beauty, Gwyneth Paltrow, Kim Kardashian, but also these are women in particular who want to get places in life. And we look at Margaret Thatcher, the politician, we look at Theresa May, and we look at people like Judge Judy, all Librans. And in the male department, we have Vladimir Putin, who is a Sun Libra. And we think of Benjamin Netanyahu, another Sun Libran, Sergio Berlusconi, And these are all characters in a way. They are cardinals, so they're movers and shakers, but they also care about the appearance of things, even indeed the appearance of themselves. So for Libra, especially those with birthdays between about the 8th and the 15th of October, this has been quite a challenging year. And again, the reason is Saturn and Pluto. This combination of factors is hard work, even if at the end of the day you get some really great results out of what you've been through. No one can say it's it's an easy ride. It never is. Which is why I'm going to come on and really look at what we are heading towards in January, this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's why the events of this time are rather important, and why I bothered to write about them on Astrology, because this is the last time we get these really hard angles from the Sun and Mercury and Venus, and Mars is going to do the same thing in a couple of weeks. It's really giving the Saturn-Pluto a room to reveal itself. And what's being revealed at this time is likely to play a big part of what will be incredibly important in the mid-January period of 2020. So I've been looking at these events. Remember, I just mentioned the idea of the withdrawal of US troops from northeastern Syria. And that has really left the way open for the remnants of ISIS who are there to kind of regroup. And where will they go? But back potentially onto the streets of Western cities. So the repercussions of the actions taken now, with the Sun squaring Saturn, squaring Pluto, and all the other personal planets doing that, we're going to see a lot more evidence of by the time we get to the January period. Now, one of the things I've also mentioned is the global economy. We want to be watching what's going on right now, because I believe that's going to be one of the biggest news stories and developments in the January of next year. So why are Saturn and Pluto such a tricky combination? Well, I like sometimes to think of the planets as personalities. And if you put Saturn and Pluto in the same room together, they've got some things that they share, some principles, if you like, but they just don't get on with each other. It was a bit like putting Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in a small cabin on an Arctic-bound steamer. I mean, they have some similarities. They both have ideas, they're both born to rule, they're controlling people, but yet they would rub off on each other in not a very pleasant way. They're difficult people to put in a small space. And so this is why astrologers look at a Saturn-Pluto arrangement, a conjunction, an opposition, or a square, and think, oh, this is going to be very uncomfortable indeed. So, of course, what I usually do is go back into the past and see what happened before when Saturn and Pluto were together. So the first place we go back to is 1982. Now, some of you are only born in the 80s, so you won't really remember what they were like. But if you do your research on Professor Google, then you'll find out that 1982 was a pretty important year. It was the year of the Falklands War, where Great Britain steamed to the defense of the Falkland Islands near Argentina, still a bone of contention with the Argentinians today. And of course, there was the war in Lebanon. So we had two really rather important wars at that time. And it came at a time when the global economy was in recession. It was a really not a good time for the global economy. And in fact, if I get my figures right, and I think about the US rates of unemployment, I think they reached some incredible heights. It was 16.3%. And so everybody was really suffering in 1982. So that's where we take our first measure from, and we look at the same thing repeating itself, you know, X amount of years later, 30 odd years later, and we're going to get some elements of conflict in here, random events that also play into the economy of the time. So we're certainly looking at that for next year. Now, if we go back a little bit further and we look at the one before that, 1948, as Saturn and Pluto were in conjunction in Leo, this too was a time of austerity. And this was largely because, of course, it was only just a couple of years after the end of World War II, and everybody was suffering. There was post-war rationing. And in fact, quite interestingly at that time, the Olympic Games were held in England, in London, and they were called the Austerity Games. So here again, in 1948, we had austerity and difficult economic times globally. And that, as I say, is something that I want to look at as we come back into 2020. Now, you may say, as a lot of people do, but the economy is already doing well. You know, unemployment has never been so low in America, and President Trump, of course, is always pointing out how good the economy is. But actually, that's just a veneer. Really, if you really looked at what was going on, again, this is something I've discussed on my homepage, you'll see there are a lot of things that are going wrong. A lot of very, very big companies not being able to sustain the debt that they are in because it's just too expensive. And that's a pattern, I think, that really needs watching, that is now coming down to you know, to our individual levels as well. And I'll come back to that towards the end of my video today. I also wanted to look at this idea that in 1982, one of the precipitating events to the recession, the decline of the global economy, was the Iran Revolution, which pumped up oil prices. And that was like the first prime mover of then what happened to the global economy. And that's the sort of thing that tends to happen. Some random event in some other part of the world that then starts to put pressure on economies all over the globe. And we look at the other times, you know, the Saturn-Pluto opposition. Again, you've got these two planets in the same room. They don't get on. They cause strife and conflict and hard times when they're together. And we look at the Saturn-Pluto opposition of 1930. And of course, that was the time, the Great Depression, and, you know, the build up towards World War II. And you know, there were a lot of things about that period of time that have a reference to our period of history that we're in right now, the rise of fascism and right-wing governments and extremist politics. You know, we have a very similar pattern going with us there. Coming a little closer to the next Saturn-Pluto opposition, and that was in 2001. And that was precipitated by the tech crash, and also 2001, 9/11. So these two events played in together and gave us another very difficult period with the economy. But I don't want to get too gloomy. You know, my objective here really is to want to show you how astrology is important, not in the sense that you look in a crystal ball and decide, oh, I see this event coming across the horizon. It isn't really like that. Real astrology is all about the little gray cells and looking at, you know, old patterns that repeat, which is what we, you know, all do in astrology. And I think that's what I want to encourage you to do, is to also listen to what I say and how I write my columns, and I write about astrology, and to see it and observe what's going on in the world and see how events come together with the signature of the important planetary alignments upon them. And I actually think that climate change and what we're doing about climate change also has a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in a good way. back in 1948, the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Leo, what came out of that? Well, certainly in Britain, the National Health Service and a lot of very good social change that came out of the climate of the times. So now here in 2020, 2019, the real issue of the day, and certainly in recent, in the last week or two, the big exposure of and protest against, for governments to do something about climate change. That's a big part of that Saturn-Pluto conjunction too. And so coming back to what do I want to leave you with, and why, the purpose, if you like, of my videos, is to say, it may look as though we can't do anything about the global economy. We can't do anything really about the fact that glaciers are melting and all the things that we hear about, and the extinctions of species. Maybe we think personally we can't do anything about it. But yes, we can in our own little small ways, in as much as a lot of the problems that are building within global economies have to do with the buildup of huge debt that I suppose individually we have to really learn to do without living on credit. We have to learn how to live within our means. And if we can do that individually, then we help towards the greater collective movement to trying to get the economy to work better for everybody. And the same really with climate change. I mean, we leave our global, our climate, our carbon footprint. Well, we need to do something individually about that. So there is something we can do about these big patterns of planetary patterns that we look at and see that they can be quite tough. So I'm going to leave you with work to do on your credit card and work to do on your carbon footprint. And I will see you next week, same place, same time. Bye for now.